No, I believe that the one voice you hear at the end of that introduction is Governor Butch Otter. And if I could just put in a quick plug, on Friday, he is going to be in Hanson. They're doing the Capital for a Day program, I believe from 9 until 3. Don't hold me to the times, but if you go in the middle of the day, he's going to be there along with the lieutenant governor and several state department heads, and they're going to be just answering questions from the public. So that'll be at the school in Hanson. That's coming up Friday. I've got a As a private citizen, I got a couple of things I'd like to talk to them about too. Speaking of private citizens, and we were just talking about how once you get involved with media, you lose that privacy and anonymity. Merle Hauk is joining us in studio. First of all, welcome.
Thank you.
I heard your presentation a few weeks ago at the Republican Party committee meeting and was really impressed by it. I happened to be sitting right behind her, and you were there as a guest of Gene Turley,
Yes.
and Gene gave me a hard time because of my I was not wearing a Green Bay Packers shirt, and that's a hugely important issue for him. But on a bigger issue, a more serious issue, you were there to talk about the number of grandparents across the state of Idaho who were, I guess, approaching record numbers who are now raising their grandchildren for any number of reasons. But the figures are, I think you quoted 30,000 now,
Almost 30,000 is 29,872, something like that.
and the numbers are growing. I would assume because, well, the one reason would be, and it's probably the least obnoxious of reasons, is that people, because of jobs and the like, have to sometimes pack up and go, and so the kids will stay behind with grandparents until something is more permanent. But also because we have such a terrible problem with the drug epidemic, a lot of times parents just aren't capable of providing the care for the children.
Absolutely. The addiction in the state of Idaho is an epidemic. And so what happens is they become addicted. The children are living in those addicted environments. And if they go to jail, where do the kids go? So as a grandparent, we step in and we take the children, hopefully before they get involved with the Department of Health and Welfare. So that's the whole reason why we, as Grandparents United for Change, are doing our profit or our program, and will be nonprofit. And what we do is we assist those grandparents in getting guardianship over those grandchildren. And because there is no laws in the state of Idaho for grandparents to have their grandchildren, I agree that it's very important for the grandchildren to be with their parents, but when those parents can't take care of them, they need to come to us instead of going into the system.
And it may well be too that the parents are sometimes they're locked up, or they're getting treatment, or sometimes they're just in a condition where they're not able to do it. I mean, even if they're not in trouble with the law, they're not in a condition to do it. Nobody's there to help the kids get their meals together, get them off to school. Uh, so for all of those reasons, grandparents end up stepping in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you have a parent that is killed or that dies for some reason, and you have a single parent there, they normally rely on their parents to come in and help in that situation. And that's what we want to do, is we want to help those parents. And as grandparents, we don't want to take over. I don't want to raise my grandchildren, but I will if I have to. But we want them to know that, yes, we are here. We are here as an organization that can give the grandparents support, but mainly to help the little ones, the kids.
When you mention there's no law that, well, nobody's probably even given it a lot of thought yet, but is there an effort to try to introduce something legislatively that would give grandparents in a crisis like this that guardianship without having to go through a lot of hoops with lawyers and courts?
Well, that's what we're doing right now. We have a committee of people who are sitting down right now and writing different proposals to take to the legislature so that we don't have to bang our head against a wall to be allowed to take those kids into our homes.
Now, for a lot of grandparents who are doing this, it's short term. But
Yes,
for others, it's long term, and I'm sure there are some needs that come up there too as well because you then have additional mouths to feed in the home. A lot of grandparents probably figured they were not going to be raising children any longer, and it's a huge shock. I mean, it's a shock to just your daily life, but as well as your pocketbook.
absolutely. We prepare for retirement, but what happens is when we bring those children into our home, that retirement money that we have for ourselves is no longer. We use that money to take care of those kids, whether it be in legal fees, whether it be putting food on the table, clothing them. It's astronomical to raise a child today, number one.
Mm.
And so, yeah, a lot of the grandparents are already in a income bracket where they can't afford anything. So when some of those people get their grandparents in their home, they have to make that choice. Do I feed my grandkids or do I buy my medication for the month? So another one of our programs that we will start funding is a foundation to help with those legal fees, to help with whatever those grandparents that are already in need can have funding so that they can properly take care of those kids.
When you reference a foundation, that means somebody somewhere needs to write a check or checks. You have to have a means of raising money in order to build this organization.
Absolutely. When we become 501(c)(3), we'll be able to apply for grants, but grants are just like anything else. They're there, but they're really hard to come by. So we go to the community. We do fundraising events. We go to the community and we ask the community to support our cause. And we've had a lot of people already who have stepped up. They have been very gracious and they're helping support what we're doing here.
Now, I would imagine that there's some assistance occasionally, or at least maybe an emotional tie with some of the local churches. Have any of them gotten involved to help out as well, or could they?
They could get involved, absolutely. We can get vouchers once we are completely done with our 501(c)(3). We can go to several of the churches and get vouchers for clothing, beds, anything that we need vouchers for that they do supply. We can get those vouchers and help our families.
And you're talking too. You just mentioned need for beds and extra furniture, but you're going to need extra dishes, sometimes extra
Mhm.
silverware, all of those things, pots and pans, anything. If you're a grandparent living alone, you may have downsized, and all of a sudden you went through that downsizing. You may have given everything away, and all of a sudden you have a need for all of these things. It's not easy. When I moved here from the East Coast and I left the household there and had to do, rebuild all of those kitchen utensils, for instance, that took me several months. It wasn't a quick, easy process.
Right. We're very fortunate that we have places like Deseret Industries, all of those organizations, thrift stores like that we can go to and we can ask them for help, and they are so gracious to help us.
I was going to say, if you don't mind the look of the color of the chair, Deseret Industries has been a great way to furnish my home. Uh, so those things come into play from time to time, but as long as it's comfortable, that's a good thing. For people who'd like to know more, have you set up a web presence yet?
We don't have a web page set up yet. We are working on that. We do have Facebook. We're on Facebook. And we do have an email address, grandparentsunited1@gmail.com. And then, of course, you can call at 208 430 4292.
That's 430 4292, and again, 208 for Idaho.
Yes.
And what was that email address again?
Grandparents United 1, just the number 1, at gmail.com.
And these are all things that in this day and age, uh, you know, in the last 20 years, we've had to come up with the websites, the Facebook pages, email accounts. Those things weren't around earlier, but hopefully they help people because we got to point out too though as well. A lot of older folks don't spend a lot of time on a computer if they never had a use for it. So the telephone number is a good way to do the outreach.
Absolutely. And we do have an office. Our office is located at 155 Second Avenue North, Suite 202.
So that's right here in Twin Falls.
Yes.
And if they come to the building and they don't have all that down, they should still be able to find it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's different businesses inside that building, so they can ask.
Is when a lot of the grandparents who are doing this, I assume they started out thinking that this was going to be only temporary as well, but for a lot of them, it's become far more than just a temporary responsibility.
Absolutely. We have grandparents who have now adopted their grandchildren. There's a lot of that happening now for various reasons. I work with a lot of grandparents whose kids have addiction problems. So that's the reasoning that they have taken their grandchildren in the first place. One of the huge things is what happens when those kids come home from rehab, come home from prison, and they think that they're well enough to come in and take their kids back. That's one of those laws that we want to introduce into the legislature is let's make sure that these parents who are coming home have everything that they need to take their children back and to raise them. It's so overwhelming when you come back out into a world after you've been in prison, let's say, for instance, and you come home and your kids are there. How overwhelming is that if you don't take a few steps to take care of yourself first, because that's what's important. As a grandparents, we're already taking care of those children. We're getting their needs met. We have counselors that we can go to that will help the kids with many problems that they have, whether they be abandonment issues, detachment issues, whatever those issues are, we as grandparents can get those kids the help. What happens when those kids come back home, the parents of these children come back home and they try to take those kids out of a safe environment because they think that they're okay now and they're really not.
Can you stick around for a few more minutes? We've got a short break, commercial break coming up. But there's a couple of more questions about that and situations people might find themselves in. Our guest is Merle Hauk, and she's joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Do you have a specific title, by the way, in the organization, or
I founded the organization, so I guess I'm the founder.
right? Founder, volunteer, president. She's wearing a lot of different hats. We're at 42. We've got more on the way. It's 9:20. We're spending some time with Merle Hauk this morning. She is the founder of a group called Grandparents United. What's the full name again?
Grandparents United for Change.
For Change. Working here in Idaho, representing, golly, nearly 30,000 people because of the numbers growing of uh, young people who have parents no longer in the picture and grandma and grandpa have to step in. We were just talking during the break that the reason this is happening, and I mentioned earlier, it used to be sometimes if mom and dad were having employment issues and dad had to take a job in California or Alaska, the grandparents would look after the kids sometimes for a year or two until everything was settled and they could move on or somebody found a job back here. But the reason the numbers are so staggeringly high now is because of this epidemic of methamphetamine and heroin.
Yes. Methamphetamine and heroin just in our town in Twin Falls has risen. I can't even tell you numbers, but it's horrible. And they're using those drugs in front of their kids. And I have a daughter who's got an addiction problem to methamphetamine, and she's tried the heroin also, and it's just a horrible, horrible disease. And I think what needs to happen, as everyone knows, is we have to treat this and as the addiction as an illness, no different than cancer or anything else. I've watched my daughter become clean, and you think that they're going to do okay, and then all of a sudden they just get back into it. And I know that people say, change your friends, change the places that you change your whole entire playground. Sometimes that's not as easy because the addiction is an illness. It takes over your brain.
I was going to say a lot of these folks, uh, well, government is trying to play catch up because it hit us so hard and so fast.
Yes.
So we can't necessarily just sit here and say it's all government's fault for not reacting quickly enough because it was unexpected. But for a lot of the younger people who've been caught up in this, I hate to say it, it started likely with just people smoking weed, and then it graduated into these other things. But even now, the quality, from what I understand, of the marijuana on the streets is, I mean, it'll leave people catatonic for sometimes hours at a time. So you can't have your kids around when the kids need to go to the potty or need to eat, and mom and dad just aren't in any condition at that point. And so many broken families too, where maybe only one parent is trying to struggle with all of this. You can almost see how they're looking for a little relief.
Absolutely, absolutely. And marijuana is a gateway. Some people can say alcohol is a gateway, even though it's something legal that you can do. Legalizing marijuana, I think, was the biggest downfall that anybody could ever do, and I hope that it's never legalized in the state of Idaho.
Can you put the headset on for a moment? We have a telephone caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX with Merle Houck at 926. Go ahead.
Bill, I would like to know what your guest thinks of Obama releasing hundreds of drug dealers who can go back to selling and getting young and old people hooked on drugs.
Well, we have a lot more people, and there's talk in Idaho of actually cutting down on these mandatory minimums, which means a lot more of these people would be back on the streets and the dealers, in other words, right?
Absolutely. And what I think about that is, you know, the prison system is not doing anything helpful for people who are drug dealers or the people using the drugs. I believe that there needs to be a lot more rehabilitation centers. There needs to be a lot more getting it out into the public's awareness that these drugs are here. You may be blind and say, no, we don't have a drug problem in our area. Yeah, we absolutely do. They're your neighbors. So, as for someone who has heart addiction in my personal family with my daughter, I don't think that prison time ever did her any good. But I think that if the judges would make them go to rehab and make them go over and over and over and over to rehab, and then if they don't get it, then yeah, put them in prison and keep them there.
We've got about a minute to go. I think that dealing with this, we should point out just about everybody out there now knows somebody who's either a relative or a friend or a neighbor or from work who has an addiction issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's hard to avoid that.
Right. And I think that you need to be very cautious about all of your surroundings. It doesn't matter where you live, what grocery store you go into, there are people all around you who are high when you're walking the street.
And yet we don't necessarily always notice. Sometimes, I mean, it's obvious, but other times, driving down the street, even through city of Twin Falls in the middle of the day, you never know who you're going to be approaching coming the other direction.
Absolutely. I've driven down the street and saw a car next to me with a bunch of kids breathing in and out of a bag. I thought, what's that all about? But yeah, that's exactly what they're doing is they're getting high.
We want to thank you for coming by, and probably we'll be talking to you again at some point because unfortunately, this organization, the need for it is just going to grow. But on a fortunate level, you'll have that not-for-profit status in place soon,
Yes.
and we can talk a little bit about where you're going with the organization after that happens.
Yes.
But I really do wish you good luck, and I think everybody out there is praying for everyone involved in all of this too as well.
Thank you.
Want to thank Merle Hawk for dropping into the studio today. We're at 9:30. It's 42. Bill Colley with you as well on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And we do want to point out one more half hour of the program is just ahead. And I'm going to tell you the next half hour about our friends at Western Visions as well.